Hey everyone, I'm Chip Boaz. Welcome back to This Week in Jazz. This week is one of those weeks where you can really feel how many different lives this music is living at the same time. On one hand, we're saying goodbye to an artist who represented some of the deepest, most personal possibilities in jazz. On another, we're looking at how jazz shows up inside one of the biggest cultural events in the world. And at the same time, we're hearing what some of the most important living artists are putting into the future. We're going to be talking about three things that show these different sides of jazz. Ralph Towner's passing reminds us that jazz is built on individual voices that take decades to fully understand. The New Orleans Jazz Fest lineup shows us how jazz gets framed, packaged, and experienced by the wider public. And the upcoming releases from Pat Metheny, Bill Frisell, and Melissa Aldana show us that this music is still being shaped in real time. So this episode isn't just about news. It's about how jazz moves through memory, through institutions, and through new sound. It's about how the past, the present, and the future all exist at once in this music. That's what This Week in Jazz is really about. We're going to start things out on a little bit of a sad note. We lost the great guitarist Ralph Towner this past week. He was one of jazz's most distinctive acoustic guitar voices, vital both as a solo artist and as co-founder of the group Organ. He was noted especially for bringing the classical and 12-string guitar into creative jazz contexts, a sound deeply individual, lyrical, and genre-defying. We know that so many players play electric, but to really have this defined voice on the acoustic guitar was a thing unto itself. Ralph Towner was born on March 1st, 1940, in Washington, into a musical family. His mother was a piano teacher. His father was a trumpet player. He started improvising on piano at the age of 3 and then played trumpet and other instruments as a child. He studied classical composition at University of Oregon, then classical guitar in Vienna with Carl Scheidt. He moved to New York City in the late 60s, originally playing piano and then increasingly guitar in jazz settings. He joined the Paul Winter Consort, which became the springboard for deeper experimentation and collaboration with future Organ members. He co-founded Organ in 1970 with Paul McCandless, Glenn Moore, and Colin Walcott, an ensemble blending jazz improvisation with folk, world music, and classical elements. Now, this is probably the place where most people know Ralph Towner. Organ was a hugely influential fusion group, not because they were laying down the funk or they were doing all the things that folks like Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock were doing at the time. They became one of the most influential acoustic fusion groups, active for decades and noted for unique musical chemistry. Now, this is an important point. We often associate fusion with the idea of bringing electric instruments into jazz and possibly even rock and funk influences. Now, Organ brought in a lot of world music sounds, especially in the early times with Colin Walcott, who played sitar and tabla and all sorts of musics from the North Indian traditions that really open things up. And boy, if you listen to, the sitar playing against Ralph Towner's acoustic guitar, it's beautiful because Ralph was not only exploring his own way to play that acoustic guitar, but he was exploring ideas around Indian ragas and all sorts of kind of world influences that just took him outside that sphere of the bebop language and gave him something unique and new. His writing became a modern standard through organ. Now, organ was around for a long time. You might argue that their heyday was in the 70s, but they went up through the modern ages, and Ralph Towner was the only constant member from the band's founding until the end. There are no organ albums without Ralph Towner. He was the core of this band through its lifetime. Organ, and you think about it, so Ralph was the only constant, and in a sense that made it, organ was kind of his band in identity and sound, even though it always functioned as a collective. It evolved into recent years, but Towner was always there, even through a constantly evolving lineup. Now, alongside his work with organ, he also had a pretty prolific solo career. He had a long artistic relationship with ECM Records. Virtually all of his solo and collaborative work outside of organ was on that label. We often talk about the ECM sound, and I think Ralph Towner was part of that, kind of developing that third stream ideal that's so often associated with ECM. Albums like Trios and Solos, Solstice, Solo Concert, and later releases like At First Light demonstrate his range. He played that guitar, but sometimes he'd layer things through overdubbing. Sometimes it would be sparse solo guitar, but it was always his identity at the core. And a big piece of that identity is something people always referred to as a pianistic approach to guitar. It was harmonically rich and often composed like small chamber pieces, not what you generally hear in jazz. Now, Ralph was a musician who refused easy categorization. You couldn't put him in a category. You could call him jazz, classical, folk, world music. It was all woven together. He influenced generations of acoustic improvisers, and his compositions continue to be studied and admired. Now, in his later life, Ralph Towner lived in Rome, Italy, continuing to perform and record into his 80s. He passed away last week at the age of 85, and what a legacy he has left behind. And one of the things that really, and I'm going to be honest right here, I, as a young musician, heard the name Ralph Towner over and over, and I listened here and there. But he's not someone that I have listened to a whole lot. But what I have heard, oh, by the way, on that note, if you've got Ralph Towner recommendations, put them in the comments below, because I do want to expand my knowledge of that, and I really want to listen to some great Ralph Towner. So give me some suggestions down below. But what I have listened to, I will say it challenges my idea of what jazz is. And I think part of that came from Ralph Towner's individual identity and the way he really brought in so many different ideals. Like, if you listen to that early organ material, it almost sounds like somewhere between experimentations with world music, acoustic music, and leaning slightly into smooth jazz. Now, I I don't say that in a good, bad, or ugly type of thing right there. I just say it's different. And it does challenge me in a way around what my idea of jazz is. Because Ralph Towner was an important musician that gave the music so much. But I wonder sometimes whether that music, came out of that bebop tradition. And I often wonder, sometimes does it matter? But what I will say is that blend between jazz and chamber music is not something I'm just noticing. You can hear that in the music of today's young jazz artists, the way that they are not just playing the melody, playing solos, playing the melody. There's composition there. There are ideas that come straight out of these concepts that Ralph Towner was championing. Now, he was an individual. He represented jazz as an art form at its most personal and uncompromising. But we have to remember, too, jazz also exists in much bigger systems than any one artist, and nowhere is that more visible than the way that jazz shows up at festivals. So the next thing I want to talk about here is the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival that just announced their 2026 lineup. Now, this event is happening April 23rd through May 3rd at the Fairgrounds Racecourse in New Orleans. Over the course of those days, that's over a week, there are over 400 musical acts. Count that, 400. That is a massive festival. You can just go and immerse yourself in music for over a week in New Orleans. To me, that sounds amazing. I would love to check that out. But let's take a stop and look at that. Over 400 acts at the New Orleans Jazz Festival. We could only classify maybe 40 to 50 of those acts as what we might consider jazz. Look at that number. Look at that number. We're talking somewhere around 10% of the acts are what we might consider traditional or jazz adjacent right there. And the ones who are there are great. You've got Ron Carter, the amazing, legendary Ron Carter with his quartet. You've got Hiromi and her group Sonic Wonder. You've got Nicholas Payton with his group The Supreme Blue. You've got some New Orleans flavor there. The Preservation Hall Jazz Band, the Dirty Dozen Brass Band, the Treme Brass Band. You've got educational groups like the Loyola University Jazz Ensemble. You've got the Tulane BAM Ensemble. You've got some legit stuff happening right there. And 40 to 50 acts, well, that's a lot of music. That is a lot of music. Might be worth the price of admission. But let's look at the other side of that. That means you have somewhere 350 or over of acts that I would argue are not jazz. We're talking about acts like the Eagles, Stevie Nicks, Kings of Leon, T-Pain, Earth, Wind, and Fire, and a lot more. Now, maybe I'm just limited in my viewpoint, but I would not call any of those acts jazz. But yet, here they are playing at the New Orleans Jazz Festival. Now, I would say that's not necessarily a complaint. It's more of an observation, because let's think about what the New Orleans Jazz Fest really is. It's a New Orleans cultural festival. It's a tourism engine. That over a week of music, that's going to bring a lot of people into New Orleans, which is going to help the economy there. It's a genre blending showcase. You have the potential here for artists from all different genres to work together, to collaborate, to maybe even make music together. That's exciting. And this is a festival with jazz at its historical center, not its stylistic majority. And let's be honest right here. They do call it the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival. So they're not completely fooling us with the idea of what jazz is. In their frequently asked questions section, they even have a question that reads, "Is jazz the only music featured at the Jazz Festival?" And the response is basically no. But more specifically, it reads, "The festival celebrates the indigenous music and culture of New Orleans and Louisiana." So the music encompasses every style associated with the city and the state. Blues, R&B, gospel, Cajun, Zydeco, Afro-Caribbean, folk, Latin, rock, rap, country, bluegrass, and everything in between. And of course, there's lots of jazz, both contemporary and traditional. Now, I've got to stop and look at this right here, because the definition of the New Orleans Jazz Festival is basically bring it all. Let's just do anything and everything right there. Now, this is common in a lot of festivals these days, whether it be the Newport Jazz Festival, SF Jazz, you're looking at the Monterey Jazz Festival, the San Jose Jazz Festival, all of these festivals across the country. You're going to find acts that we might not consider traditional jazz. And you might say that's limited or not, but hey, let's call it what it is, right? Now, I have to think about that. When you've got a festival, a jazz festival, that brings in acts like Stevie Nicks and the Eagles, does this benefit or harm jazz as a music, as a tradition, as a culture? Well, let's look at the bright side, okay? There might be the fact, you could make the argument that having bands like Stevie Nicks or the Eagles might bring more people to that festival, and those people might get exposed to traditional jazz, and because of that, those people might, and that's a big maybe, they might become lifelong jazz fans. Okay, there's that. Now, you could also argue, well, the blending of genres is something that has always happened in jazz. It's a cultural melting pot. And I would say, heck yeah, thumbs up right there. That is very cool. I would love to see the opportunity and maybe the paid facilitation of collaboration between these artists. I'm going to be honest, I kind of doubt that's happening at the New Orleans Jazz Festival, but what if it did, right? What if it did? What if we saw Ron Carter on stage with Stevie Nicks? That'd be cool. What if we saw Nicholas Payton playing some trumpet behind T-Pain? That might be cool. The possibilities are endless. The festival needs to take control of that and make that happening. But if that were to happen, that could be a cool result of it. Now let's look at the other side of equation right here. Does this harm jazz? Well, I might argue that turning major jazz festivals into big pop shows takes opportunities away from jazz artists. Now, if we were to argue that maybe half of the New Orleans Jazz Festival was traditional jazz artists, and we are talking 200 acts, what if those were all jazz artists? Can you imagine how that would help the music? How that might help artists who are trying to push their jazz careers forward? That would be amazing. But instead, we've got Stevie Nicks, we've got Rod Stewart, we've got Lord in the headlining spots. What if those were shared at least equally with jazz artists? That could make a big difference in the jazz ecosystem. Why do we not do that? And I'm being fairly generous. I'm talking about half of the festival. What if we had 75% of the festival? What an opportunity that would be for jazz artists, legends, and young players alike. I do feel like filling the festival with pop artists like this does take opportunities away from more traditional artists, and I think that's a little sad. But I do have to say that this also, another issue we have to think about is that we are not all hardcore jazz fans. There are lots of people in the world who are going to come to this festival with a very fuzzy idea of what jazz is. And when they see T-Pain at the New Orleans Jazz Festival, that idea of what jazz is going to get even fuzzier. Now, again, you might say, does this matter? We're in a day and age where genre is being broken down, and it might not even matter anymore. Yes, but when we're talking about promotion, when we're talking about an artist putting themselves out there, if someone thinks that T-Pain is jazz, they are going to support T-Pain because that's in their comfort zone instead of a jazz artist. And once again, those artists who do not get the same sort of promotion and widespread acclaim that someone like T-Pain does, well, then those artists are not going to build their career. And I feel like that is a bit of a disservice right there. So there's a big piece of me that thinks that we need to rethink the way that we label jazz festivals, the way that we structure jazz festivals, and the way that jazz festivals serve the greater jazz community. Because I question if things like the New Orleans Jazz Festivals are actually making a huge difference for jazz musicians. I might be way off the mark here. I don't know. Put your thoughts in the comments below and let's talk about this, because the way that we think about jazz matters. It really does. Because we want this music to survive. We know that it's happening right now because the next thing I'm going to talk about is some new records that are coming out from some established artists. I just want to see that keep going and going and going. But let's get into those new albums right there, because there are a few new releases coming out in the next month that I'm very excited about. I've had a chance to listen to the singles associated with these albums, and I have some thoughts. So let's get into them. The first one is Phelan from Melissa Aldana. This one's coming out on February 13th on Blue Note Records. This album sounds really exciting because this is Aldana taking a completely different course. If you are familiar with Melissa Aldana's work in, say, her Crash Trio, where things were a little bit outside, very exciting, amazing music, but definitely challenging music. This new project digs into feeling, a Cuban music tradition that blends bolero, trova, and jazz sensibilities. This literally means feeling in Spanish. This was a big movement in Cuba in the 70s, and it is amazing. It's not the music that most people think of when they think of Cuban music. So this is really exciting to see Melissa taking this music in and doing something different with her. This reframes her work a little bit because, like I was saying, things like the Crash Trio and some of her other albums were deeply rooted in post-bop. But this is going into Cuban song traditions. We're talking, these were the singer-songwriters of the day. So lyricism and rhythm are central to the concept. Now, the concept itself is exciting, but listen to who Melissa Aldana has playing with her. Her co-collaborator on this, Gonzalo Rubalcaba, legendary Cuban pianist who is just such a deep and fascinating musician. You've got Pablo Menares on bass, Kush Abadi on drums, and then you have guest vocals. Cecile McLaurin Salvant is on 2 tracks. That lineup itself makes me want to hear this. Get this though, this is produced by Blue Note president Don Was, who is trying to help shape a broader sonic identity. This is interesting. Now, we all know Don Was is a bass player. He's got his own jazz projects going on. But when the president of the record label comes down to produce your album, that means he believes into this. This is powerful. This album is supposed to be more ballad-centric, introspective approach that really intrigues me. This emphasizes melody and space rather than technique, dissonance, and kind of intensity right here. And this is really exciting too, to see Melissa Aldana go back and integrate cultural heritage into jazz. This is a purposeful move that matters. And I gotta say, the collaboration with Gonzalo Rubalcaba is so exciting. Now, I listened to the first single, La Sentencia, and right from the beginning, you can hear how much more of a deeply personal album this is. Aldana's playing is some of the most reflective that I've heard from her. It is just beautiful the way she improvises quietly, almost to a whisper at points. You've got to hear this. And one more time, the inclusion of Gonzalo Rubalcaba is key here because he is a pianist who has such a rich and vast harmonic and melodic language. You've got someone who can both match and push Melissa Aldana. No small feat. But Gonzalo is that person. And at the same time, he grew up with this music and has it internalized, so he knows how to turn it inside out and to just find the inner beauty. And this track really shows that. The space on the track is magical. All the musicians play with it in ways that just lets them explore the music. This is going to be a great album to check out. The second release is from guitarist Bill Frisell, and it's called In My Dreams. This is coming out on February 27th, again from Blue Note Records. And this is kind of exciting because it's tied to Bill Frisell's 75th birthday. So it's celebratory and it looks back on his earlier work. Now, Bill Frisell has been with Blue Note Records for a while, doing all sorts of interesting things. This is an artist that really pushes our idea of what jazz can be. He blends jazz with Americana. He brings in chamber textures, and he creates these amazing soundscapes. So any new album from Bill Frisell is always an exciting proposition. Now, listen to the personnel. Okay, of course you've got Bill Frisell on electric and acoustic guitars. Then, you've got Jenny Scheinman on violin, Evind Kang on viola, Hank Roberts on cello, and Thomas Morgan on bass. Now, did you hear that? Did you hear there was another guitar on the album? No. Did you hear there was a drum kit player on the album? No. Did you hear there was a pianist on the album? No. You've got Bill Frisell with a string quartet. That is the stuff dreams are made out of. Now, like I was saying, his work over several decades now has been him exploring many different things. I cannot wait to hear what he does by experimenting with string textures. It'll be interesting to see. Now, anytime you reach a milestone like a 75th birthday, you've got some looking back and some looking forward, but more than anything, you get a culmination of a life's work in there. So this has the potential to be a very, very interesting album, potentially more intimate and more chamber-like. This is a piece of Frisell's evolution. And boy, evolution in such an interesting way. Now, the single that I got to hear was a song called In My Dreams. This is a deeply different work that honestly really surprised me with the compositional emphasis. The strings right away stand out as a unique feature. They make such an interesting texture here. I can't wait to hear the rest of the album because the potential of what Bill Frisell can do with the writing for strings, his textures he has on guitar, and his improvisational prowess just sound like such a fascinating proposition. And, you know, Bill Frisell has always been an artist concerned with texture. I will never forget the first time I saw Bill Frisell live, and he was playing mostly electronic guitar, and the way that he shaped things using effects just blew my mind. I'd never heard anything like it here. In this case, on this single, he's doing the same thing with acoustic guitar. Not with effects this time, but using ideas of timbre in mixing that acoustic guitar along with strings. It's truly fascinating and worth a listen, and I can't wait to see what the full album brings. Now, the last album that I got a chance to check out is Pat Metheny's Side Eye 3+. This is being released on February 27th, and this one is on Uniquity Music. This is Metheny's own new label. Now, that's pretty cool because this is an artist who has been working with the major players in terms of record labels with jazz for a long time. So he is taking this on and doing his own thing, which could free up artistic considerations, which is always really exciting. And speaking of freeing things up, this is the first major studio album from Metheny in 6 years. That's a long time. So it's exciting to hear him coming back. This also continues his Side-Eye project. This is a concept focused on elevating a new generation of collaborators. And that's what being a experienced, older jazz musician is all about passing on the tradition, creating opportunities for young artists to not only build careers, but to build artistic identities. And that's exactly what Pat's doing with this project, and it's really exciting to see it continue. Now, the personnel on this, of course, we've got Pat Metheny. We have Chris Fishman on piano and keyboards, Joe Dyson on drums. That's the core side-eye trio. Then you have guests that fill things out. Daryl Johns on bass, Brandy Younger on harp, and Louis Conte on piano. And then we've got a very interesting addition, Mark Kibble, who was originally in Take Six, bringing in a vocal ensemble to contribute choral textures and a touch of gospel music. Very, very interesting stuff. Now, the single that I got a chance to listen to was a song called In On It. And I've got to say, out of the 3 albums I checked out, it was probably the most interesting single of the 3. I mean, hey, I'm ready to listen to all 3 albums, give them all a chance, let them all be different, and hear the beauty that all 3 of these artists can bring. But this one definitely grabbed my attention. Now, part of it is just Pat Metheny burning on guitar, playing over the core group with his distinct and unique improvisational voice. He's probably one of the most exciting improvisers in modern jazz, so that's always a thrill to hear. But then, in the middle of this, it goes totally electronic, which works really well because, of course, Pat Metheny has masterfully kind of shaped this so it's related, but it's sonically diverse. It features some great drum work from Joe Dyson, but this is also a great place for Metheny's synth guitar work, which I have always loved. I haven't always felt like it fits in totally, but this time, oh, so good. I can't wait to hear this one, and honestly, I can't wait to hear all 3 of these albums. Exciting stuff. Now, before I wrap this out, I just want to zoom out for a second because this episode really shows what it means to talk about jazz in the present tense. We looked at Ralph Towner, who reminds us how much of this music is built on a lifetime of personal exploration. One person, one voice, shaping something that lasts far beyond them. And we will remember Ralph Towner. Thank you for everything you gave us. We looked at the New Orleans Jazz Fest, which shows us how jazz lives inside much bigger cultural and economic systems, where it shares space with a lot of other music and a lot of other priorities. We looked at new releases from Metheny, Frisell, and Aldana, which shows that jazz isn't just being preserved, it's still being written, challenged, and reimagined right now. That's the tension jazz always lives in, between art and industry, between tradition and change, between memory and invention. And none of those things cancel each other out. They're all part of the same ecosystem. So when we talk about This Week in Jazz, it's never just about headlines. It's about tracing how this music keeps moving through people, through institutions, and through sound. That's what keeps it alive. I'm Chip Boaz, and this has been This Week in Jazz. Thanks for spending a little time thinking deeply about this music with me. Share your thoughts down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.